Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm very honored to moderate today's discussion at the Blockchain Summit on the data and blockchain with a focus on how to achieve trusted consumer data sharing. The previous debate with Robert Kopich and Emin Gun Sirer was excellent about Bitcoin, and I think that we can continue the perfect debate about the blockchain perspectives. Some starting points. We understand the significance of the data economy and data society in our time. We are starting to use data as a special driver in many areas. For example, to personalize healthcare systems and lead to the fully adherent diagnosis and therapies, bringing 120 billion euro of savings per year in the EU health sector. To personalize healthcare systems, to personalize even more than now, and in the much more transparent schemes, the consumers' patterns and behaviors to make them fully satisfied. And to personalize and make more efficient relations, business to business, business to clients, clients to business, clients to clients, also business to governments, which is crucial for the development and growth. The essential challenge is addressed to the data sharing schemes and the trustworthy framework and conditions for obviously necessary data sharing models. Necessary means useful for users and ensuring the effectiveness of many services. It is crucial to describe adequately the conditions for data sharing, legislative, organizational, technical, and to define the opportunities to build the trustworthy solutions. Looking at the debates in the European Union, we should emphasize some points. Whether personal data are sufficiently protected and secure, and do public institutions and business entities use the data properly with adequate level of guarantees and effective safeguards. How we need to define the problem of data ownership and how it will look like under the data sharing rules in the business to business, business to clients and clients to clients processes. How to create the basis for data altruism solutions, how to enhance the reuse of public data, because very often they cannot be made available as open data. And additionally, how to make real the digital rule book for European Union and United States cooperation, also for the data flows, because it is needed for global standards. For example, safeguards also for non-personal data in the international context. What is special added value when we are talking about data sharing models and blockchain opportunities in all possible fields? How the decentralized blockchain environment, protocols, tools, credentials can help to build trusted consumer data sharing. The usefulness of blockchain depends on solutions in some areas. What is needed from the regulatory perspective, and I hope we will talk about this, what is needed from the business perspective, possibilities of cooperation, practical models of data management and data consent management, development of the trust between consumers and providers, which should be based on the real symmetry of information between parties. What is, in addition, the most important for the consumers to involve them in the data sharing models, to convince them to make it, giving them the transparent principles, ensuring the right to choose, ensuring the feeling of the trust and certainty of the rules. And finally, what is necessary from the technological and technical perspective, and how the blockchain solutions should be implemented and adapted to the new requirements and expectations. We have invited for this debate the significant representatives of key partners from the business, science, and public institution sides: Christian Tunia, Policy Officer, Cybersecurity and Data Privacy, European Commission DG Connect; Inge Rübe, founder of KILT Protocol and CAO of Bot Labs. KILT is a level 1 blockchain for digital identities built in Europe. As he expresses, it's crucial. Its goal is to give the data back into the hand of the users. We also invited Michelle Fink, Senior Research Fellow from Max Planck Institute for Innovation and Competition; Nick Sharman, we hope that he will join to us, Project Director, Economy of Things from Bosch, Catena X board member; and Marta Bechler, Chair, Filecoin Foundation. So we are starting the first round, and now I want to give you the floor, the screen rather, to present your general view on the topic discussed today. Christian, please.
Thank you, Michal. Thank you very much for the invitation to join you this very interesting event. I'm going to speak about the European Commission's agenda with regard to data, specifically on the Data Act, which I'm working on now, and also the potential role of blockchain in that framework that we're constructing. We're on the cusp of another explosion of data generation with devices fitted with sensors and software and other technology. We believe that data is going to be produced ever closer to the device than we've become used to in the last 10 or 15 years, where data has tended to be processed remotely in the cloud. But it's also a fact that although there's so much data in circulation, most of it is what they call dark data. It's not being used. It's not being put to work for people or for society. It's also a fact that it's only the elite companies. It's calculated, I think, by a McKinsey study a year or so ago that only 8% of companies are actually making value out of the data that they generate and gather. So it has an economic value, data, but it also has an environmental value in pursuing our green goals, but it also has a liability for environmental harm, as was touched on in the previous session. The data economy is something which has enormous potential, but it's also very efficient. There are inefficient, I mean. There are many opaque practices. Big platforms at the moment are announcing phasing out of third-party cookies, for example, but they're not being any more transparent about what they're doing with data themselves. They're not changing what they're doing with the data themselves. We also have weak cybersecurity generally across the piece. Software is out of date, awareness is low, hence the massive spike in ransomware attacks that we've seen in the last few months. So the Commission's data strategy is intending to serve a wider industrial strategy, and the European Green Deal. It builds on the GDPR, e-privacy, and the free flow of data regulation from previous years, but we want to make the data work for the environment, society, individuals, and businesses in Europe. So under that strategy, we have in the last 6 months proposed a Data Governance Act, which is now being negotiated by the Parliament and the Council. That involves governance and a framework for trusted intermediaries and for the creation of data spaces in different sectors of the economy. We've got the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act, which are intended to curb the most harmful behavior of the most powerful platforms. And we've got the Artificial Intelligence Act from 2 months ago, which is meant to steer innovation away from potentially harmful applications and to integrate data protection rules into a new regulatory architecture. And then finally, the Data Act, on which we've just published a public consultation, and I hope all of you will have a chance to look at it and take part in it, which is really intended to try to promote a fairer allocation of value in the data economy. So businesses, and especially SMEs, accountable public bodies in the public interest, individuals, and also researchers, they have a stake in the data economy, but they don't necessarily have a fair share of the value. And then just finally on the role of blockchain, we think that it may have a role. If you look at our public consultation, we're looking into smart contracts. They're not necessarily on the blockchain, but they could potentially give assurance that data will only be accessed and used as fairly agreed. To track provenance, particularly important given the complexity of supply chains and people's concerns about who's accessing personal data. And also given that code is at least in theory, clear and unambiguous, unlike natural language, although there are still questions about what happens if you wanted to change a smart contract, because there are misunderstandings or bugs. So we think this is relevant for creating data spaces and automated data pooling on a large scale. And that's where we are at the moment with the data strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. I think this is a good introduction to our discussion, because you have expressed the framework for our discussion. And now I want to ask Inge for your view on the blockchain opportunities in the European Union, in Europe, and all over the world now, please.
Maybe we start a little bit with data first, because what we heard from Christian is actually something went wrong, and now we try to solve it. And let's take one step back and see what actually went wrong, because this is, I think, really, really interesting. When we look at the 90s and the 2000s, the internet went into something we call the Web 2, right? And the Web 2 now started that we had the possibility of interacting with each other. We had everyone became a writer. Everyone could post something on the net, and it was actually composed by the users. And this is where we needed to store identity first, and this is where we needed to store the data of the users first. And users started to create data on the go. They were moving somewhere, they were reading something, and this all produces data. And as we heard, only 8% of the companies are actually making money with this data. This is because there were some companies who jumped on this wagon very, very early, and they collected a lot of data. And the thing about data is, if you have X amount of data, that doesn't give you any business opportunity. You need 1000x of the data. And if there's already one there who has 1000x of the data, it doesn't really, it's not significant. If you have 10x of the data or 12x of the data, you will never make money with it. You need huge amounts. But why did it actually happen? It happened because there was no possibility to really decentralize the data. So I couldn't, as a user, be responsible for my own data. The technological means were not there. And this is why we needed those intermediaries, those Googles, those Facebooks, those Twitters, all those big companies who actually store the data for us. And then they made a business model out of that, which is absolutely fair. But now they have a lot of power. And what we do in types of regulation very oftentimes is that we try to limit their power, but we don't look at the technological problem anymore. The technological problem is already solved. So we can decentralize the data. I can be the master of my own data. The technology is there. We just don't use it. We got used to the centralized data model, where all the data of a user is of millions of billions of users is put into one big silo. And we say, okay, let's now try to regulate the silo instead of thinking, hey, maybe we can make it better and give the control of the data back to the users. And this is actually how it works in the physical world. In the physical world, speaking of identity again, identity is made out of two things. One is an identifier, that's me, that's Ingo, that's my fingerprint, that's my face, that's my eyes. This all belongs to me. It wasn't given to me by anyone, not by a company, not by a government or anything. It's just mine. I made it up myself, right? And then you add credentials to that. And those credentials are my driver's license, my passport and stuff like that. And they were issued by trusted entities, which is absolutely fine. But I still control what I sign. And when we talk about data, it's going to be interesting who owns the data. And if I want to prove that I own data, then I somehow have to sign it with my identifier, right? So that it can be made clear that it is actually me who owns the data, who shares the data with someone. And if we don't decentralize that, then we do have a problem. And in our thinking, it's always, yeah, somebody's going to centralize it there, and then I have a password and a username there, and he will take care of that. And I think we have to get out of this thing and be at least as free and liberal in the digital world as we are in the real world. I decide if I sign a contract, right? It's not a company deciding for me if I sign a contract. And I think that this is the general thinking that we have to change. And like 20 years ago, we couldn't change it because the technology wasn't there. But now we do have the technology to do this. And blockchain is going to help a lot in this thing, not only blockchain alone, also cryptography in general is helping a lot. We just have to make those things a little bit more user-friendly, and then we will have a great chance to actually go into the right direction. What my feeling about what's happening very often right now in this discussion is that we see a huge problem and we don't go to the root of the problem. The root of the problem is technology, but we try to somehow later cure the symptoms. It's like the water faucet in my kitchen is dripping and I call a lawyer. That will not help, right? Maybe I can sue the plumber, but it would be nicer if I call the plumber in the first place and give him some money and then he fixes it, right? And so this is where we actually stand, I would say.
Thank you very much, Inga. I think that it is crucial to understand not only symptoms and try to solve some problems related to symptoms, building regulatory framework, but on the other hand, look at roots. And this is the view you have presented, that how important is my control of data. This is a philosophical, but also crucial for technology and for future solutions view. Thank you very much. And now I want to ask Michelle Fink, please, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me. So when I think about trust and trusted consumer data sharing, I guess I'm actually thinking of two different things. So trust, on the one hand, for me, has a connotation to compliance with the existing law, which means making sure that the fundamental rights and other rights that users derive, in this case from EU law, are respected. And secondly, I'm also thinking of I guess, fairness. So the idea that beyond those legal formal protections, the systems are also operating in users' interests, meaning that the data, in particular, their personal data, is being collected and analyzed in the interests of consumers rather than in the interests of, say, a few large corporations. Now, regarding the latter aspect, I think there's certainly many interesting blockchain-based projects that seek to achieve the latter and transform current business models related to the harvesting and analysis of consumer data, particularly personal data, and which are mostly based on centralization of data in silos into more decentralized networks of data that serve the many instead of the few. Now, I don't really have a crystal ball to predict the future, so I guess that only time will really tell whether, I guess, this fairness aspect of trusted consumer data sharing is something that can be achieved in the future. Regarding the first point, however, meaning trusted consumer data sharing in the sense of compliance with existing law, I think it really depends on what we mean when we talk about blockchain on the one hand and the data that is being stored on it on the other. So I think it's important to sort of recall that there is no one blockchain. Rather, when we're talking about blockchains, we're really talking about a class of technologies that have very different technical and organizational configurations, and thus also present very different forms of legal compliance or non-compliance, depending on those configurations. So assessing whether a blockchain actually complies with the law, I think really requires us to undertake a detailed analysis of a given project that takes into account what blockchain is being used, what the technical and organizational configurations around that blockchain are, etc. Likewise, I think when we're trying to assess compliance, it also, another important factor that really varies is where the data is actually being stored, right? You have projects that store data directly on chain. I think that's something that's largely more problematic from a compliance perspective. And then, of course, there's also projects that store data off chain in different configurations and only link the data to the blockchain. So when we're trying to look at trusted data sharing in respect of consumer data, I think those are two different factual components that we need to take into account to verify compliance, in particular with data law. That said, I think it's also important to remember that this is really something that has been written and talked about a lot in recent years. So most people will know this, and I'm not going to go into much detail here. But still, many people have pointed out that there's definitely general tensions when it comes to using a blockchain to process data, in particular personal data, and the European Union's general data protection regulations, such as in relation to compliance with Article 17 GDPR, which enshrines the right to erasure, or which is also sometimes referred to as the right to be forgotten, when it comes to the designation and responsibility of a data controller, when it comes to data minimization, and of course also when it comes to international transfers of data. And then the last thing I'm going to mention is the Data Governance Act. This is an area that hasn't been talked about as much yet, but I think is really interesting to cover as well, particularly in light of the fact that this is a regulatory proposal. So the Data Governance Act is not yet law. It might become law in the future. And one of the things that the Data Governance Act does is create a legal framework, which I would describe as a sort of light touch notification framework for data sharing services. And of course, there's a whole range of, I think, really interesting projects that try to create data sharing services and which rely on blockchains. And while I think there's definitely a lot of potential there, we also see some potential tensions, particularly when it comes to really fully decentralized and anonymous projects, which I think might actually struggle to meet the requirements of the Data Governance Act in relation to data sharing services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I think it was very interesting to show how important are different kinds of components when we are talking about data sharing models. It's not only legal aspects, and also how we can use the proposed solutions from Data Governance Act and make the situation much more clear and much more understandable for users, probably. And now I want to move to Nick Sherman. Nick, are you with us? Hi, Nick. Okay, so we need to we can go to Marta Blecher. Please, the screen is yours.
Great. All right. Well, good morning. I'm glad to be here. I'm Marta Belcher. I'm the General Counsel of Protocol Labs and the board chair of the Filecoin Foundation and the Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web. Relevant to today's topic, the mission of Filecoin is to store humanity's most important information. Now, on Tuesday, dozens of websites in the US and Europe went offline for an hour due to an internal glitch at a major cloud service provider. Sites including the UK government's main public service portal and several major US and European news outlets like CNN, the New York Times, were inaccessible. This is just the latest example of how the internet centralized model creates single points of failure. And that's particularly concerning when you think about the fact that file storage right now is basically a monopoly. So much of today's internet relies on just a few players to store and serve billions of websites and applications. But if you decentralize the internet, multiple nodes can fail without the entire system falling apart. So on today's internet, if I go to a web page, that information is being retrieved from a particular server somewhere in the world, maybe very far away from me. I'm looking for that particular web page in a particular place and hoping it's still in that place. So imagine that you just read a great book and you recommend it to a friend, but you don't tell them the name of the book. You say it's at the New York Public Library, third shelf from the left, 5 books over. That's how today's internet works. To see that book, you're going to have to fly to New York, go to the public library and find the place on the shelf where that book is supposed to be. But what if it's not there? Or if someone moved it? Or if someone tore out pages? What if when you get there, you realize that it's a book that was in your backpack the whole time you were traveling there? Again, that's today's internet. It makes a lot more sense to just tell your friend the name of the great book that you just read and to let your friend find that book by its name rather than its location. And that's how the decentralized web can work. So this is what IPFS, the Interplanetary File System, does. Rather than retrieving content by where it is, it retrieves content by what it is. It uses content addressing. So content on the web is addressed directly using cryptographic hashes, its content address, instead of by reference to a location on a specific server. This means you don't need an exact web address to find your file. You just need to know its content address. And if you already have it, or if someone near you has it, you can retrieve it from there instead of retrieving it from across the world. Now, if you add up all the storage capacity and computing power on individual users' devices, on our phones, our laptops, you start to wonder whether we really need our data to sit in data warehouses, mostly unused, when we might instead combine our storage and computing power into effectively a supercomputer network. And that's the idea behind IPFS. Now, the one thing about IPFS is if someone is serving the only copy of a file and they close their computer and go offline for a few days, that file isn't available while they're offline. So in order to make sure that data is persisting on the network, you need to make sure that there are multiple copies or that someone is incentivized to always make it available. But if there's no central corporation for you to pay to host your website or store your data, who is going to host it? Why would people be motivated to run the infrastructure for a decentralized web? And our answer is Filecoin. So Filecoin is a decentralized storage network that I believe is a foundational technology for the decentralized web because it adds the incentive layer for the decentralized web. So it creates built-in economic incentives to ensure that files are stored reliably over time. So you can think of it like Airbnb for file storage. Miners rent out their storage space and earn Filecoin for doing so, and users spend Filecoin to store files. I think that IPFS and Filecoin are one of the foundational technologies for the decentralized web that can be capable of what our mission at Filecoin is, which is storing and preserving humanity's most important information. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Marta. I think it was excellent, especially this case with the New York Library. And you explained very precisely what kind of advantages we have using those decentralized models. Nick, are you with us?
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me now?
Please, the screen is yours.
Super, thank you. I had some technical issues, but it's cool that I'm fine now. Now, I think if we before we talk about how to achieve trusted consumer data sharing, I'd like to highlight some issues on the characteristics of data as a good, and then see how modern crypto and DLT technology can help somehow. And I think one of the most important things you have to, there are two dimensions you can classify goods. And one is if it's rivalrous or non-rivalrous. So it means if I have, for example, a candy bar and someone eats it, nobody else can eat it. Very obviously, with data, it's different. So it can be copied almost virtually without any additional cost. And the other dimension is the excludable or non-excludable dimension. So can I exclude someone, or can I somehow control the access to the good? And I think also data is here quite in an interesting position, because today, if I, as a consumer, share or even try to sell data, it's extremely difficult for me to keep track of what's happening with the data. So this fact that it's non-rivalrous and today very difficult to exclude, from my point of view, leads to a sort of a market failure. So there are no markets for consumer data with fair monetization issues. And I think what we have to make sure is that I somehow, as a consumer, can make my data excludable. And I think here DLT technology and complex machine learning technology will have an important role. This means, especially, for example, if we look at ideas like ocean technology or ocean protocol technology, where I can directly attach a policy to my data and make sure that the data is only used in a certain way. I think this is a very good way forward. And the other one, which I also find extremely interesting and which I think has a huge potential, is to make sure that my data really never uses my premises, so to speak. And if I, for example, take the example of a machine learning use case where a model is trained with my private data or personal data, there's the idea which is called collective learning. It's a learning algorithm, a way to use a distributed learning algorithm to make sure that the model is trained based on my data and based on the data of all the other contributors, but the data is never really viewed in the open by the entity which wants to train this machine model data. So the entity only gets the trained model back, and then all the raw data used isn't accessible to that entity. And I think if we, again, if we want to achieve trusted consumer data sharing and to make sure that really consumers also share more problematic like health data and so forth, I think we have to look into these two directions to realize that.
Thank you very much, Nick. I think it was important, and in my view, you have touched the problem of high level of data understanding, because very often we are discussing about using the data and needed requirements to make them and using them much more secure and much more focused on personal data protection. But on the other hand, we need to discuss how to use the data using this collective learning and understanding the problem, how to share the data. The general question addressed to you after your first presentations of your views sounds like in the context of European Union activity, the Artificial Intelligence Regulation, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Market Acts, the Data Governance Act, and in preparation of the Data Act with consultation which has started. What do you think, and coming back to the blockchain possibilities and decentralization of data is much more secure and important, what do you think, what we should do thinking about data development as useful for our economic development, social development, which means how we need to work with data, especially with the concept my data control, not only thinking about legal framework, but with some new technologies and new concepts. Is it clear? Because I think that we need to touch. So sorry, I think that it was not so clear. So in the context of new European legislation, how the blockchain could develop and what is needed, and if those new legislative solutions will stop blockchain solutions or will support building the new advantages of blockchain solutions. Inge, please.
Me, I'm sorry. Yeah, so, well, I think that, as Michelle already pointed out, we are somehow moving maybe in the wrong direction here, because when we always consider that data has to be centralized in any lawmaking that we do, then we might move into the wrong direction. It's a little bit like, probably many of you are familiar with eIDAS. That's an old thing, and I know it's going to be revised, and we have to do that. But this is a perfect example right now. If you stand here in 2021 and you want to move forward to 2030, and then you want to make a project which potentially includes blockchain, and then as a project, you normally look around a little bit, especially when you're European, and you look at what regulations are there. And when you see something like eIDAS, says, okay, basically we can't do anything decentralized. There has to be a centralized anchor always inside some data silo or so. And then you want to comply to this regulation, and then you start moving backward. And then you look at the Chinese and the Americans and you say, wow, why are they so fast? They are not so fast because they're fast. They're fast because they're moving forward and we're moving backward. And this is a problem. I think there's it's still a problem of understanding, probably, that most of the guys inside the blockchain world, especially the developers, they don't want to do anything bad, right? They don't want to take away the power of the governments or whatever, and they only so for example, in our case, we just want to give people the possibility to have their own identifiers. And that's not taking away anything. It's just moving into the state that we have in the physical world, the digital world, which is going to help the industry, and it's not against it. But we still suffer from those regulations around us, and we see a lot of projects which say, we just gave up. We just do it in a way that it fits into the regulation. And the danger behind that is that we waste a lot of time there in those projects, doing things which we actually know from the bottom of our heart are actually wrong, but we still, as we want to be in the legal framework, we move into the wrong direction. And that makes it a little bit complicated for European companies. And this is why we see so many of the blockchain companies actually leaving the country and go or the continent and going to other continents. It's I think we should be a little bit more flexible with those things. Of course, we have to address them as well. So if you find a regulation which hinders you in working, then you can basically do three things. You can either ignore it, which is not always the best case. You can start to hope to change the regulation. This is what we're doing here right now. Or you can just obey to the regulation and then you start moving backward. I think we have to go for second choice in Europe. And this is why it's very, very good that we're talking here.
Now, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Inge. I'm sorry because the first version of the question was cut because of technical problems, so I'm sorry. But now we can go forward, and I can see the question put by Robin Lemon from Data Union App. Why does data need to be tied to an identity? Would something like an Ethereum wallet be good enough? rewards can be distributed, a reputation is created by know your consumer is not needed. If somebody wants to ask for this question addressed to us as panelists, it's on the chat.
Well, I can give a short thing. I mean, I think it's very valuable that if we can tie data to identities and disclose it if it's necessary, but only if it's necessary, simply from the fact that as a company, we need to make sure that we know our customers regarding and complying to anti-money laundering rules and regulations and so forth. So I think there are some use cases where having a verifiable credential or a verifiable identity attached to data is crucial.
Yeah, maybe I can add to that.
Yeah, please.
There's always the misunderstanding between identity and identifier. Identifier is just a single number or a single name which identifies someone, and identity is much more. It's adding the verifiable credentials, as Nick just said. So isn't Ethereum a good identifier? Yes, it is a good identifier because it is made by yourself. It's not given to you by the Ethereum network or something. You produce it on your computer, right? This is a very good identifier. So, does data need to be attached? Probably yes. If I want to control the data, I need somehow to prove that is my data. If I want to share it, then I have to have means to prove that it is actually mine. If I put it on the Filecoin network, for example, then it's there. But it would be also nice that if I want to make money with it, if I want to make sure who looks at it and stuff like that, then I have to give people the freedom to look at it or not. And this is given by an identifier. So identifiers should be linked to to many pieces of data, not to all of them. Right now, we are not doing it. I think the modern way not to do it is not to attach an Ethereum address, even though that is possible. What we have standards around that. Decentralized identifiers, DIDs, are standardized by the World Wide Web Foundation, together with the Decentralized Identity Foundation, where many companies, including Microsoft and so on, are part of that. And so we are a very good way to do this. And that would make the Ethereum identifier rather a credential that I also control this address, right? And that together is extremely powerful and is exactly moving into the right direction.
Thank you very much, Inga. I think that was an excellent explanation. And we have the two additional questions. Ken Carnegie, how Bosch thinks Colearn will shape the future in terms of industry's business? Nick, could you answer for this question?
Yeah, I think thanks. It's a very good question. I think it's hugely important. There's an initiative which is called Catena X. It's under the umbrella, so to speak, of Gaia X, which is a data space, what I call a cooperative data space. So we want to build a data space in the automobile industry, where we, as big companies, can share data to make the products better. And in the B2B business, it's always a huge problem to share data on products. And there's a very interesting use case within Catena X, which deals about failures of cars during usage. So if some part fails, you need to know what kind of part it is, why it failed, and you need a lot of data to find that out. And obviously, a lot of the companies are very reluctant to give one entity all the data they have, and this entity then can do a failure analysis and find not only out what kind of data, what kind of failure, or what the failure root cause was, but finds out all kinds of other stuff as well. And I think the reluctance on sharing data can be very well overcome if I, as Bosch, for example, can make sure that my data is only used to train, for example, an AI model that exactly tries to solve this failure case and nothing else. and I need to prove that this is the case. And if I'm able to prove it, I think the reluctance across industries to share data is greatly reduced.
Thank you very much, Nick. And we have also a question put by Alessandra Christova. I would like to know if you have any advice with regards to the technical implications of the blockchain and GDPR compliance. How are SMEs supposed to solve the dilemma between being GDPR compliant and technically viable? If somebody wants to ask for this question, please. The floor is yours, the screen is yours.
I'm happy to speak to this. So I think
okay,
it's
please, thank you, please.
So coming back to the point that I was trying to make earlier, I think it's really hard to sort of give one piece of advice regarding the compatibility of blockchains and GDPR, considering that there's different configurations of blockchains that are being used in different technical and organizational environments, and all of those factors really matter when we try to assess the compatibility of one particular blockchain usage and the GDPR. That said, and I think this ties back to the question that Michelle initially asked, one of the sort of innovations that I think will be important for the development of both blockchain and trusted data sharing in the EU in the years to come are privacy enhancing technologies. So Nick has been speaking a lot about collaborative or federated learning, which I think is going to be an important building block of this. There's also other developments, such as, we see blockchain projects using trusted execution environments, and definitely also zero knowledge proofs, which I think is an area where we're going to see lots and lots of innovation in the years to come, particularly in relation to blockchain. So I could imagine those technological developments being building blocks of more compliant blockchain use cases in the future.
Thank you very much. I think it was also very, very useful. And there is a question addressed to me and to others. How do you see trusted data sharing take shape in the upcoming European health data space? If somebody wants to answer, to respond, please. I will add something, but I'm only moderator, yes, but if somebody is ready, please.
Well, I can tell you that this is hi. This is a proposal that the Commission is working on at the moment. You should expect to see it before the end of this year. It's essentially trying to find a framework for people to take their medical records around and make them accessible around the EU, so it's easier to be a cross-border patient. It's very difficult for, depending on where you live, it's usually very difficult for you to access your medical records and to take those records to different services that you might want to use. So that's the idea of the European health data space. It will depend on trust. It will depend on the security of the technology. It's obviously extremely sensitive data, and that's obviously something that we're working through now.
Yeah, thank you, Christian, for this answer. I would like to add something. Firstly, we need clear rules, because this is the question of personal data, sensitive personal data. So how to use those data, how to use anonymization and some solutions which can guarantee the security and data protection. So this is clear and very, very important. Additionally, I think that we need to work on interoperability, because now if you want to have this kind of European health data space and use the data and some records with clear purposes, in the real time, we need to have much more interoperability, technical interoperability, technical but not the semantic level, which means the possibility of many systems to talk each other. And the third issue, the third aspect is related to the political challenges, because as you know, health is under the member states' competencies in the treaties. So it means that firstly, working on the European health data space, we need to work with member states to guarantee that they will be active and they will participate in this. So they will decide that the data of patients from one nation, one state will also be available and will create this European health data space. So there are many aspects of this issue, and it is not easy to answer for that. But thank you very much for the question. And now we have just about 17 minutes to finish our panel. I have prepared some questions to you, but I think that looking at those questions, you know, those questions, it would be better now to try to summarize our discussion and give the floor and the screen to you, starting with Christian. What is, after this discussion, what is your view on blockchain as the best, if I can say, environment for creating trustworthy data sharing models, and on the other hand, how to avoid over-regulation of the system if we want to develop the data economy and the data society? Christian, please.
Well, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the blockchain is potentially helpful. It's a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. As Michel said, that blockchain can mean many different things to many different people. Views on its compatibility with the GDPR framework differ. If you talk to data protection authorities or if you talk to others, Michel's report to the European Parliament was excellent in that respect. What I would say is that we are looking at the potential for smart contracts, which is usually a technology which is on the blockchain, but not necessarily, because we think that has potential were it to be used in an interoperable and standardized way across the EU to facilitate data sharing where there is a lack of trust. Whether that's, what we're basically trying to do with the Data Act is to free up data where it's being where it may be being monopolized, or where companies don't trust other companies with that data, or where companies don't trust public bodies to use the data in a responsible way. That's an important component as well, which we haven't touched on. And then also as regards individuals and their data, as has been said, people want to know what's happening to the data that concerns them, and there is the potential for blockchain and smart contracts to give people the ability to trace and track what's happening to their data. So there is a lot of potential there. There are lots of question marks. The environmental impact of blockchain technology as well needs to be confronted, because data itself is something which is essential for achieving our green goals, but at the same time it has a growing and unacceptable carbon footprint, which we need to reduce, and that's also part of our data strategy.
Thank you very much. And the question addressed to Ingo, and some kind of wrap up of this discussion from your point of view. But you have mentioned the significance of data control and my data control, if I can say. So what kind of tools we can give to the consumers, to users, to people to keep the control of their own data?
Yeah, as I said, we actually have it all in place. It's now there. It has been developed over the last 5 to 10 years. I think that smart contracts are a development of the blockchain industry, which is from 2014, I think. So this is since then we have developed further along. We have things in place now, like KILT, which is the project I'm working on, which actually gives people the possibility to make their own DIDs, to attach trusted entities' credentials to that, to share those credentials in a safe way, and all those things. So this technology is there. It's also there's Ocean was mentioned, which is also an important building block of the Web3, I would say. It's working, and it's there for attaching smart contracts or behavior to data. Actually, we have Filecoin and IPFS out there, which makes it possible to store data in a decentralized way. So we do have all the building blocks, or almost all of the building blocks, of a future web out there. And this can be used, of course, for everything that Christian just said, right? And to build a data structure economy, or an infrastructure which is serving the needs of the industry and of the people much more than the current web is, and much more than also central databases are. And I think it would be really, really important if politicians, policymakers, also industry, very much more start to embrace those technologies, because they're not theory anymore. They are now on the market. We can play with them, and we can see how they would actually change the whole economy completely, in a way that is much more European thinking, I would say, because actually the European thinking is very much like have the responsibility in the hand of the individual, and have the and this is basically implementing Europe here. What many companies from all around the world did for the last 5 years, and this should be recognized a little bit more, probably.
Yeah, thank you very much. And of course, this is a way also for consumers to understand more what is going on, because I feel some kind of the lack of symmetry of information between providers of some services and users. And I want to address this question to Michelle. What do you think? How to build this kind of trust, and how to convince users that using the data under the blockchain circumstances, using smart contracts, will be secure and will develop many sectors and also many services which are important for the everyday life of users, of consumers. Michelle, please.
Yeah, so I completely agree with Christian that we shouldn't see blockchain as an end in itself, but rather a means to an end. And I really, really do hope that it can be part of building a data economy, and I would say even data usage beyond the economy that's much fairer and more sustainable than what we have today. And when I say sustainable, I really mean the 3 dimensions of sustainability, environmental, but also economic and human. I think that's definitely still a bunch of building blocks that need to fall into place for that to happen. And coming back to what I said before, I think one of the technical elements that are needed are more privacy and data protection. So there's this common misconceptions that most blockchains are private by default, which really isn't the case, right? Many of them really are not, and anyone can see any and all transactions that are occurring on the network, which, coming back to a bit of the news topic of the day, makes me a bit skeptical about using something like Bitcoin as legal tender, for instance. So I think that is one of the points that need to be addressed in order for that to be the case. But yeah, I do hope that that blockchains are one of the building blocks towards towards building a more trustworthy usage of data.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and Nick. You also you are involved in many activities related to the economy of things. What is the relation between economy of things and Internet of Things, and how the special added value done by blockchain could develop this area of new opportunities, of new possibilities?
Yeah, I think the well, what we call economy of things is really a whole stack of different technologies. Like we already had them today: trusted execution environments, smart contracts, self-run identities, collective learning, and so forth, to achieve a certain goal. And this goal is to build a platform that is owned by no single entity, no single company. But it's still one platform where you can, for example, share data. So it was just one name we invented. In fact, it was invented years ago by IBM, but it nicely has this reflects this idea that if you want to have a fair and good market data sharing, you need some economic incentives, economic ideas to make that happen. And if you want to have a running economy, you want to avoid monopolies. And this is the technical ideas on how to avoid monopolies are very well reflected by blockchain technology, for example.
Thank you, Nick. And Marta, what is your opinion how to incentivize the blockchain data sharing models? You have mentioned in your first presentation how important are those economic incentives. So how to incentivize the blockchain data sharing models?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's exactly, as you said, that's exactly the purpose of Filecoin is to basically add an incentive layer on that sits on top of decentralized web technologies, and incentivizes people in order to give them a financial economic reason to be effectively running the infrastructure that underlies the decentralized web. And I mean, I think from a policymaker perspective, I think you've talked about the importance of regulatory clarity, and I think from a regulatory perspective, it's so important for these types of projects to really understand what the guardrails are, and not to have those guardrails become roadblocks. So one of the things we've been talking about a lot here has been, for example, using the example of GDPR. You have these laws and regulations that I think are intended to be helpful for innovators, and we've talked about all the reasons that these blockchain technologies are so excellent for these types of data sharing models. But you then also have certain implications of laws. For example, with GDPR, the assumption that data always has a sort of centralized architecture, which is just not true for blockchain, or the assumption that data can always be deleted, which is again also not true for blockchain. So I think very important that these types of laws and regulations are both clear and don't have unintended consequences for the technology.
Thank you, Marta. And it turns out that we have 5 minutes, and I want to ask you to present in 1 minute what is, in your opinion, the most important for some kind of to-do list for blockchain development and making this with using blockchain solutions and achieve trusted consumer data sharing. How to achieve trusted consumer data sharing. This is a general topic of our today's panel. 1 minute per each. Please, Marta, you can start now.
Sure. I would just say that the most important thing for regulators to-do list here is to ensure that these the laws and regulations that are being put in place around data don't assume a centralized architecture and don't assume certain things about technology, and also that we aren't necessarily legislating the specific technical details, right? I mean, the example of data deletion is one where it has huge implications for blockchain companies. You know, we've seen just in this Q&A people asking, well, how do I comply with GDPR? I think it's really important to keep in mind that those types of regulations can have unintended consequences for an entire category of technology.
Thanks a lot, Nick. Your turn.
Yeah, well, sorry. To give in this last part a bit of a different perspective, I think one of the most important things also to achieve the trusted data sharing is not only look at technology but also push forward the consortia and governance issues, which are somehow forgotten. So if you want to scale a system, especially a decentralized one, you need to have a sort of a governance that makes sure that the system stays benign, stays fair, that companies can adopt the system and be sure that it runs in 10 years to come. And I think this is one of the most important aspects we have to focus upon next to the technology. And I think that it's going very well in that direction. And we have Gaia X, we have Catena X, which are huge consortia which look at decentralized data sharing. But these consortia, they give a good governance and a high scaling potential. But we as blockchain and DLT enthusiasts have to make sure that the classic industry and these classic consortia understand the potential of this technology.
Thank you very much, Nick. Michelle?
Yeah, I would agree with Marta here that particularly when we're talking about the GDPR, there is a need to get more specific guidance as to what specific concepts in the GDPR in this case mean. And I think this is particularly, you know, talking about the deletion point. This is something that's unclear, not just in relation to blockchain, but more widely, right? So I think anyone that's using data in the EU could really benefit from having a more specific definition of what it means legally to delete data. And what we have right now is different interpretation of this legal notion of deletion across different data protection authorities in the EU, across different courts in the EU, etc. So getting more guidance on this as to what the sort of technical translation of the legal definition of deletion is would be really helpful, I think. I recognize this is hard, particularly in light of the fact that there's actually very little independent information and educational possibilities for regulators and others in relation to blockchain. So I would say the second thing that is needed is just more of that, and also more I guess, collaborative discussions regarding the technology, its potential and limitations, as well as regulatory implications.
Thank you very much. Ingo, your turn.
I'd also like to second Marta, basically. I think it's important that in anything that we do, we have to respect that there's a centralized world, but there's also a decentralized world, and we have to think both of them all the time. And it's always an option. You can be centralized or decentralized depending on where you want to go. And being also a member of the Gaia X project for 1.5 years now, it's really, really complicated to be the advocate of the decentralized world already in industry, but let alone government. It's really, really complicated to always tell them, yeah, there is another solution right now, and it may be better for the case that we're doing right now. And we're doing that. We're doing that together with Bosch. We're doing that together with the people from Ocean. But it's really we have to really get more awareness for the possibilities that are out there right now, because they could change a lot for the better.
Thank you, Ingo. And Christian, please.
Well, you know, Michal, that I've got a background in data protection. We've worked together on that in the past. And in defense of the GDPR, the central notion there is that there is accountability. So if something goes wrong with however someone has handled your data, you know where to go in order to rectify it and to have justice. That's what I think the fear is amongst the data protection community about where does the accountability lie for data on the blockchain. Having said that, GDPR isn't enough. There are imbalances and inequalities in the data economy which need to be addressed, which have been touched on in this really interesting discussion. One of the things that we're doing for the Data Act is we're looking at all of the different ecosystems in the EU economy and looking where the issues are with data. And you look from one sector of the economy to another, and you can see that there are some sectors where there just isn't any digitization at all. So what the question for blockchain advocates is, how does blockchain help a farmer in a remote part of, I don't know, Bulgaria, where they think potentially they could potentially use a smart device and they want to get value from the data that's generated by using that smart tractor or whatever. So, we're really looking at the broader data economy, the different actors there, and how we can ensure that the digital dividend is more fairly distributed.
Thank you very much, Christian. I think it was very, very important what you have said, starting with accountability. Thank you very much to all of you for the excellent debate, the excellent panel, with explanation many aspects of the functioning of the blockchain, but on the other hand, how to use the blockchain solutions achieving trusted consumer data sharing. If I can wrap up very briefly, I would say that we need accountability, that we need to understand decentralized data as an opportunity, that we need the proper regulatory framework, but not to over-regulate some solutions, that we need to adequate governance. It was raised very strongly, that we need cooperation between all partners, and there are governments, there are business, many public institutions, but on the other hand, consumers should be treated also as partners. And the last point, awareness. We need to raise the awareness of those problems related to data control and what kind of techniques and technologies we can use for the future development of data economy and data society. Important for all those aspects and issues is trust. So with trust, we can finish this panel. Thank you very much again to all of you, and thank you very much to all to the all audience, and also to people who put the questions. Unfortunately, we have no time to respond to the question done by Simonetta Vezzoso, Osita Egonu, Axel Bielen, but next time probably we have the possibility. Thank you very much again. And now I want to move to Robert Kopicz, please.
Thank you, Michał. Thank you, our panelists, for the great debate. We have a small lunch break now for everybody to grab something, get a tea, get a coffee, or eat something, depending on which time zone you are. So please stay with us, get some nibbles, and then we see each other at, if I'm not mistaken, around 1:30. If I'm not mistaken, am I mistaken? 1:15, sorry, and for the next panel. So please stay with us, and thanks again to our panel. Thanks, Michał. See you later.